The face of world heavyweight boxing, Tyson Fury, also known as the Gypsy King, recently shared his views on how the potential fight with UFC champion Ngannou might play out. Both champions pack a heavy strike, and it's predicted that the first to land a solid punch will be the last man standing. While most sports analysts claim that the highly anticipated fight is unlikely to take place anytime soon, we've got you covered. Sit back and relax as we give you the latest updates on the mega fight. In an interview with ESPN, Fury admitted that the Cameroon star is without a doubt a total machine. While the Gypsy King is certainly eyeing the historic mixed rules bout in the near future, he isn't overthinking it, despite Ngannou holding the record for the hardest punch in the world. "It's just a stand-up punching battle with small gloves on," said Fury. "He's got big power, and so do I. So whoever lands first is likely to get knocked out." Like most crossovers, the potential fight gained attention when Tyson Fury exchanged tweets with Francis Ngannou over Twitter. The UFC heavyweight, aka the Predator, was quick to respond and accepted the challenge before proposing his own set of rules to even the playing field. Ngannou has turned down almost £5 million worth of contracts in hopes of scoring a big payday on the Fury fight. How likely? 90%. "I know he wants that fight. I want that fight. I'll do whatever it takes to have that fight," said Ngannou on the Joe Pomp show. He also asserted that the fight would happen regardless of whether the UFC promotes it or not. The fight could easily mean the biggest payday in the UFC superstar's career if he fought in the Iron Ring. Despite retaining his UFC title, Ngannou only bagged $600,000, whereas Fury made a whopping $30 million in his trilogy fight against Wilder. UFC president Dana White also shared his views on potentially the biggest crossover fight of the decade after McGregor took on Mayweather in the ring. But he was quick to mention Ngannou's contract and place a condition on the fight that it would have to gain the same momentum as the last crossover. It's a tough one. Obviously, when there's this underground swell from the fans and from the media, and the event builds up into something like Mayweather versus McGregor was, you saw how that worked out. I ended up doing it, said Dana. Rumor has it that Dana White has been trying to set up a Jones versus Ngannou to generate big money and hopefully retain the Predator. However, Ngannou has been quick to dismiss any possibility of that match, saying Jones finds better battles on Twitter than in the octagon. And trust us, we're just as confused, thinking, what exactly is Dana White trying to do? When asked whether he would fight again under the same contract, Ngannou replied immediately with a one-word answer: no. It looks like the Clash of the Titans is definitely going to go down in the near future. What makes things even more interesting is that both fighters are at the top of their game. In an absolute slugfest, Tyson scored a definitive knockout against Deontay Wilder in the 11th round late Saturday night in Las Vegas, retaining the world heavyweight belt. Ngannou, on the other hand, had a turbulent last appearance in the octagon. The Predator retained his UFC heavyweight title after a unanimous decision against opponent Cyril Gane, that too with a catastrophic knee injury. However, both fighters have their own challenges to face before sitting down and actually pushing the fight in motion. Ngannou faces 9 months on the sideline after suffering from a torn MCL and an injured ACL 25 days prior to the Gane matchup. Fury also has his eyes set on the matchup with Dillian Whyte, which will be announced anytime now. Talking to ESPN, Fury called Whyte a bigger challenge than Ngannou, stating, "Dillian Whyte is a much harder challenge for me than Francis Ngannou at this minute in time. For now, it's obvious that both fighters have their focus on things beyond their potential matchup." Next, Bored Adesanya. Israel Adesanya has been in the news for some time now, emerging as the most modish and perhaps most dangerous sensation in the octagon. The last stylebender has had a rocky 2021, with only 2 appearances in the octagon. Calling his matchup with Blachowicz a side mission at UFC 259, Adesanya attempted to become 2-division champion, but unfortunately failed, losing for the first time in his MMA career at 21-1. Shortly after the fight, the last stylebender dropped a category and is ready to defend his title for the 3rd consecutive time against Robert Whittaker at UFC 271. In an interview with ESPN, Adesanya admitted that he had become rather bored, claiming his opponents weren't really a challenge for him in the octagon, especially hinting at the Vettori fight. "There was a point in the Vettori fight where I got bored. We all saw the last stylebender switch off in the middle of the fight as his opponent became super defensive, despite being a contender for the title. Because the guy wasn't trying to win, he was trying to survive," said Adesanya. "I'm the one with the belt, and you're being super defensive, so yeah." There were moments in the fight when we saw Adesanya mocking Vettori's punches by screaming and even making deliberate faces at the camera. Adesanya is eyeing at least 3 fights this year as he attempts to tap into the young Izzy once again. And while he's trying to do that, the stylebender never fails to make a statement. As per Paradigm Sports, the same talent agency that manages Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya became one of the highest-paid MMA fighters in history after signing a multi-fight deal with the the UFC, making him the second highest paid active fighter behind the Irishman. Up next, Jake Paul's constant blows. The Disney-turned-social media star turned boxer has recently been taking real jabs at Dana White. Okay, before we move on, let's get one thing straight. Jake Paul is mostly popular because of his controversial remarks and somewhat legit boxing career. But this time, we think he's actually making sense. His most recent strike at the UFC president was when he publicly announced on his social media that he had invested in UFC's parent company, Endeavor. Paul said his investment was focused on obtaining some control within the company to provide proper long-term health care and improve fighters' pay. He's also looking to launch a union to protect fighters' mental and physical well-being. Just a few days back, Paul even released a diss track aimed at Dana White and his weird business practices. While Jake may seem like a one-man army, he claims there are a lot of prominent fighters that support him privately. There are a lot of fighters, a lot of big fighters in the UFC, who message me privately and say, "We love this is hilarious, keep on going, but I can't support this publicly," said Paul on MMA Hour. He says most fighters do not wish to bite the hand that feeds them by showing their support publicly, and he has no problem with that. Previously, we've seen Jake Paul working really hard to help women fighters organize and get big fights as well. Just recently, he announced perhaps one of the biggest bouts in women's boxing history between Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. The fight is being promoted by Jake Paul's own MVP, Most Valuable Promotions. Let's hope something constructive comes out of this feud with the UFC president. Next, looks like McGregor won't be getting redemption against Poirier in a fourth fight after all. The first time the duo met, the Irishman had a convincing victory over the Louisiana native. However, Poirier pinned down the Irishman 2 times in 1 year, with the latter snapping his leg the last time they met. On a candid Twitter Q&A, Poirier said that he would not be fighting McGregor for a 4th time, even though the latter expressed interest immediately after his loss in the 3rd matchup. Looking back on that gruesome scene, Conor was down on the ground with his back against the cage, and all we could hear was him screaming, "Doctor stoppage, doctor stoppage." Many UFC stars, including Colby Covington, have told McGregor that pursuing the 4th fight is pointless. Makes sense, because soon after, Covington said he should be the one to fight Poirier. But what we found most intriguing in the Twitter Q&A was Poirier's profound interest in stepping into the boxing ring with McGregor. When a fan asked if he would be interested in a boxing match against Conor, the Louisiana Diamond replied, "Book it." We're guessing most fighters actually do have an issue with UFC payouts, but are just too afraid to speak out. Nevertheless, Poirier's next fight will most certainly be in the octagon, with a verbal agreement already made on a matchup against Stockton gangster Nate Diaz. However, an official announcement is yet to be made. So what do you think? Will we be seeing Fury versus Ngannou anytime soon? And if so, who will be the first to land a finishing blow? Also, are fighters really underpaid under UFC contracts? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.